issues. Hey everybody! Thank you all very much for tuning in to my programs, and like last night, for example. But I'm really excited to present Dr. Balan. And Doctor, how do you say your first name, by the way? And we were doing the preamble. I never got there. I was so busy talking about what was on my mind.
It's do you go? It's as if you say do you go somewhere, but it ends with a U. So it's do you go?
Do you?
Duygu Balan.
What is that?
It's a Turkish name. It actually is the word for emotion in Turkish. Duygu.
Are you from Turkey?
Yes, I'm originally Turkish.
Oh wow! Is your family okay given the earthquakes that happened there recently? Or
Thank you so much for asking. Yes, they're all okay.
oh,
Thank
thank
you.
God! Yeah,
Yeah,
that was.
yeah,
Uh,
it was a hard time. Still is. The challenges continue. Yeah.
wow. Well, before I divert into that, but let's focus on this. The doctor here, the good doctor, has been focused on something called mommy issues. And doctor, can you talk about what that is and what your research has been?
So when we talk about mommy issues or the mother wound, a lot of times what we think about is abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, or physical abuse, and we don't often think about the more subtle ways that this relationship can be challenging. There is actually a lot of people struggle with this relationship, and it's very widespread that there are challenges, but it's a taboo subject because we're supposed to be best friends with our mothers. And that's not a myth, it is true that there are really strong mother child bonds. But there's also oftentimes a lot of struggle and challenge that comes with this relationship, with this attachment.
Hmm. And so, when did you first become interested in this, by the way?
Well, I think, I've always been interested. I'm always interested in relationships and the dynamics and how they play out. I think ever since I was a kid, I was always interested in relationships. And we moved a lot around a lot. So I just got the experience of seeing these relationships play out in different cultures. And it was just fascinating to me. So, and then in my practice, it just came up so much, these attachment woundings, and it's often an overlooked trauma. So it's often overlooked how difficult these experiences can be. And that's why I just feel like it's so important to talk about it, because if we don't talk about it, then we just continuously replay the same stories over and over again, and it just creates more difficult relationships.
I think, well, I'm proud to say that I have a great relationship with my mom, but I'm here as caregiver, and I'll be 61 August 4th. Uh,
Congratulations.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
yeah, I am a month and a day behind Tom Cruise. Well, we're born in 1962, the greatest year ever. But
Yeah,
anyway,
that's true.
my point is that I thought by now in my life I'd be married with kids, and I realized like 6 years ago, as my mother started to me obviously age, because my mother has had the luxury of looking like she's 20 years younger than she is,
Mhm.
sometimes 30. And I remember when I was a teenager, because she basically raised me from 6 when she divorced my father. And had she not divorced my father, I may well have been dead, because I had a psychiatric reaction to how what should have been a really great family life was going. We owned they owned two cars, a Lincoln and a Cadillac. This is 1962. Black
Mhm.
family owned the two flat in Chicago. The renters were Jewish. I mean, that's a story that could play out at any time. Not even today, right? Especially today, given how ethnic relations have improved. I prefer to use the term ethnic because we're all one race. But my point is, um, I had a reaction to that. And so she raised me from then. She got a job at United and was able to show me from the time I was 7 to up a part of the world, particularly as a youngster, that I normally would not have seen. We went to Paris, Rome.
Mhm.
Um, we went to Honolulu every year from 1971 to 1979, and stayed at the Princess Caroline. I saw the Manhattanization of Honolulu before my eyes. I
Mhm.
promised you I wasn't going to talk as much, but I feel like by sharing my experience, it might help ground, our conversation. But and so I feel like now it's important that I'm here for my mother because she gave as much to me as she could, and why not? She gave me a great life, so why not be here? And I find, however, that I get a lot of, "Hey, this is great," from bystanders, people who are some friends, some quasi friends. "Hey, you're doing something that's great." And the implication is it's not normal. And I'm thinking, well, I know it's normal because I'm on. There are people out there who are caregivers and they're only children to their mothers, right? But what's going on where it seems like some people are afraid uh, to be there for their mothers? And is this a reaction to what's going on here?
Actually, it's an interesting point that you bring up. I have a lot of clients who tell me in therapy, in session, that they feel shame for talking about their mothers in a negative light. They
Yeah,
say, "Oh, they sacrificed so much for me. I can't believe I'm talking this way." And if you can't complain about your mother in therapy, then where can you complain about your mother? Nowhere. So I think it's an important point because the mother and child relationship is actually doesn't the unconditional love doesn't go both ways. So the mother biologically is loves the child unconditionally because in nature there's no way that the baby can survive without the mother's unconditional love and care. But for the child, the love of the mother is a love that's earned, because any other love is love that's earned. So the child actually doesn't owe anything for to the mother. So it's a relationship where, if the bond is true and deep, that it will come natural for the child to support the mother and or parent, father too, and be there for them and want to be in relationship. When we first had our son, actually one of a very wise mentor told us that the goal for you to have is for your son to want to be in relationship with you when he grows up, for him to want to call you when he's in town and actually be present with you at the dinner table on his own will with his heart. And that really resonated with me, and that's my goal as a parent. I want to make sure that he actually really wants to hang out with me, not feel obligated or not feel like he owes me that he has to hang out with me because I sacrificed so much for him. I sacrificed for him as a duty out of pleasure as a mother, not because I expect him to pay back anything.
you said also in your research that you found there was an uptick in what you call mommy issues. And
Mhm.
was that recently? And please talk about that because I don't want to pretend like I know more than what you do about what you did.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know if it's a recent issue, mommy issues, but we talk about it more recently, which I think is so important. And there just should be more and more about it. There should be more representation about it in social media, more representation in novels, in TV shows, because it's just such an important topic. Actually, there's a book that just came out recently that I really enjoy, and I'm so glad that it's out. It's a memoir by Jeanette McCurdy, and it's called "I'm Glad My Mom Died." And I'm guessing that,
My
well,
biggest fear.
well, there's an irony in the title, but I think it's very important. It's probably a very healing process for her to write about the abuse that happened, the difficulty, the challenges, and also very helpful for many who have had struggles with their mothers, who have had, or parents, and who have had challenging relationships. I just think that these are just really important conversations. And now we are able to have it more and more, but still it is a taboo. Still, it's a difficult conversation to have because it's just there's an idealized version of what mother-child relationship looks like,
Hmm.
which, in some cases it isn't the way that it is supposed to be or meant to be.
I'm curious. I have a friend. who just recently, she says, and it pains me to say, broke off a relationship with her mother because her mother is, among other things, she says, racist, a Trump supporter, and all of that. And she says she'll never talk to her. Is that, I mean, to me, that is sad.
Yeah.
But is it?
I mean, of course, it is very sad. It's sad, but I also think that uh, so the mother-child bond is not necessarily a biological. It doesn't have to be a biological bond, and it's the person who gave birth to you is not doesn't make it so that you owe them anything. And if the mother is the person who takes care of you, the person who makes your lunch and stays with you at home when you're sick and wakes up with you at night. So, as I said before, if that bond is strong, then there wouldn't be the need to cut off the relationship. Sometimes in traumatic relationships, there is the need to heal, maybe temporary or maybe for a long term, to cut the relationship so that the person can actually heal from the trauma. So that I don't know your friend, of course, but I'm guessing that there's deep rooted relationship dynamics that led to this.
Mhm.
Most of the time, it is an enduring circumstance, many events that lead to a decision like this. And there could be ways of restoring it, but the person would need to do their healing on their own first.
Now, you talk about in your work, you talk about the impact of maternal attachment on adult relationships and understanding the long term effects of insecure attachments with mothers and their influence on subsequent relationship patterns. Does that explain why I'm not married now?
Well, secure relationship is actually when the person feels safe, the child feels safe with the mother. So and believes that they are worthy of love. And when this attachment is secure, then the kid can venture into other adventures, into other objects to play, and to other people. And when the attachment is not secure, then instead of getting curious about life and living, the child spends a lot of energy seeking approval of mother or parent, or looking for the safety, and being in an alarm state where certain developmental tasks don't become possible, and individuation and separation with mom doesn't happen in a healthy way. So I don't know your relationship with your mom. There are many different ways, and it sounds like there's you are very deeply connected, and we love your mom deeply. So I don't know
Yeah,
why you're not married yet, if that's even a desire, because I think that's another thing, that we have these ideas of what life should look like, but there's really no conventional way. There's no one way of living.
I think to finish that thought, um, had I had well, I'll just say basically, I probably would have been in a marriage that was destructive, and so I probably was saved from that and didn't realize it at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and 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 that is a candid admission, you know, because now my generation, the people I grew up with, I went to Skyline High, graduated class of '80 because I know you're in Oakland, and
Mm-hmm.
Tom Hanks. But anyway, but some of my friends say, well, gee, so you don't have to worry about getting divorced. So maybe I was done a favor, but uh, I don't, I don't understand why. There's something in my head that's always kind of like, okay, there's something wrong, and I think it's tied up in being a caregiver, in not being able. Well, it really is tied up in being a caregiver, but kind of not really having an outlet to talk to other caregivers to know that what I'm experiencing going through is what's supposed to happen. I try to reach out, but it's the life is upside down because I have to worry about things like if she's going to fall out of bed or something like that, and she's in a we have a big place, so it's not like you know Um, it's it's something I have to do, but I feel like if I don't do it, there's nobody here, right? So I
Yeah.
feel my choice that there is, and we're in a great place for octogenarians. Don't really are. Um, Although I think Oakland, if you find the right places to live in, contrary to the media, is also a place where you have people like that who are helpful. But my point is that there is a constant kind of shame that goes with it. It's kind of like, well, this is your burdens, and it's not a burden to me. I don't feel burdened. My mother even says, she says, go out and explore and have fun. I feel like I've done that. I'm at the point where um, this is my responsibility is to be here for my mother, because if I weren't, it would constantly weigh on me, and that is a byproduct of the kind of life that she gave me when I was young. But I'm wondering, is that a typical feeling? But also, I'm wondering if you're in research, have you stratified this by race? You know, like for Black mothers, Black kids, Black men as boys. I'm curious.
I think it's an interesting point because when we're kind of, what I thought when you as you were talking was how when we always talk about it takes a village to raise a child, but in our reality, in our societies, we see that the mother is usually alone. A lot of times the mother raises the child alone, and I'm not even just talking about single mothers. Also in partnerships, mothers are raising their children alone. They're the ones who are responsible for their children's education and their meals and bathing them and soothing them and all of that. Even in the Bay Area, progressive part of the world, we still see that it's predominantly the mother's job to do. And as you were talking, I was thinking that it's very similar when it comes to taking care of our elderly, that we're actually also alone in that there's not enough support and not enough resources to help us in this journey that is a difficult and demanding and rewarding journey all at once, that requires actually a village too.
Yeah, you say too. I'll get to that in a second. When you say, what does that village look like? Does it? Here's why I ask, because it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we're in this era where people establish their own family differently. It's even in commercials. Your family doesn't look like you, right? Which I think is really cool. I mean, we've finally gotten to a point where our television is reflects American culture, because for a long time it didn't. You know, and now it's cool to see that it actually does. But what does that mean, family? What does that mean that today in this, terms of that village? What does that look like?
I mean, ideally, I think it looks like kind of intergenerational relationships.
Hmm.
When I first became a mother, for instance, my family was in Turkey and I was by myself. We lived in New York City at the time. And I really actually was craving for elderly women around. And then there wasn't really any elderly women figures, but I really wanted the wisdom of them, kind of being near to that kind of energy and that kind of wisdom just felt so important to me. And just creating your own tribe and creating your own bonding. So I was able to find other mothers who also didn't necessarily have their family around, and we created our own group and we supported each other, and we just were allowed to talk about the challenges of motherhood and the difficulties that go with it and the sacrifices that go with it. And that was really helpful to me and really felt really grounding. So it could look many different ways. The world right now is so big, and we don't really have to live in the places we're born, and a lot of people don't. So I think it's really important we call it, in my family, we call it the chosen family, where we choose our tribe and our people, and we create this bond and this relationship where we can support each other and we can connect and grow.
Has the pandemic had an effect on your research, and if so, what have you found?
Oh, tremendous effect, of course. There has been so many different family structure changes because of the pandemic. And some people were extremely isolated. We, for instance, have an only child. So for us, when schools closed, it was a big concern. As I said, our family isn't close. So we were really worried that he was going to miss out on socialization with his peers and miss out on other characters, because parents are not enough. Your child needs many other models of people around them. And we also were concerned for our parents who are aging and who are on the other side of the globe. And it was, before it felt easy, the idea of being able to just go to them. And then with the pandemic, that became impossible, that it was very limiting. So that was very scary. So of course it affected, but there was also people who had to unite families, who had grandparents move in, and that was sometimes a very rewarding, very enriching experience. But sometimes it was very challenging when all these dynamics clashed with one another and new ways of relating had to be created without the support of school systems or mental health services. It was a difficult time for a lot of people,
You
and
see,
still is, actually.
yeah, I was going to ask, is it a measure of the degree to which we've come back to normalcy?
Uh,
That,
I think so. I mean, I think we are slowly going to normalcy, and in some ways, normalcy is looking a little different. But
hmm,
there are some scars from the pandemic, especially on children, because for adults there was a template of what it was, the what normal life was, or what social relationships was. But for children, I mean, even going to the grocery store was a scary event. So and germs and masks and hand sanitizers just became, I never had a hand sanitizer when I was a kid, so it definitely has long-term effects on children, I think. But in some ways now, there's much more opportunity to socialize. There's much more opportunity to engage in extracurricular activities, and schools are, for the most part, back. So those are all very supportive and encouraging and promising things that I think are kind of drifting towards more and more normalcy.
so mommy issues, to define it, I guess, is that I have an issue maybe with coping with uh, having a constructive criticism of my relationship with my mother, or what is it with, how do I encapsulate a mommy issue?
I mean, I think one way that I conceptualize mommy issue is the when the child feels responsible for the mother's emotional needs, when they have to maybe shrink themselves and make themselves small for the approval of the mother. I think that is very alarming, because the mother, the child is supposed to be free and supposed to be liberated and supposed to have their own experiences and live to their fullest potential. So when the mother the narratives and the belief systems that the mother has that are maybe not very healthy. And some of these are societies impositions on women, right? Like, for instance, that a woman can't take much space or has to be apologetic for asking for help. Like, these kind of ideas of what it means to be a woman gets passed on from generation to generation. And so mommy issues can also look like this, where the internalized belief systems and wounds of the mother becomes internalized by the child, which is why as parents it's our responsibility to make sure that we heal our woundings and we come into terms with the sacrifices we make for our children, and we grieve our losses so that our children don't have to carry it to other generations.
Now that gets to this question: um, breaking the cycle, overcoming mommy issues. What does that look like?
It's, I think it mostly looks like doing your own work, and some of it is through therapy. I think therapy actually is really does tremendous amount of change when it comes to relationships, parental relationships, because in some ways the therapeutic process looks a little bit like the parent-child relationship, where the therapist holds space for the client without having any emotional demands. So it's never about the therapist or the therapist's needs or the therapist's personal beliefs. Everything is always in the benefit for the client. So in this nature, it kind of resembles what parent-child relationship could be. So it's an opportunity to have a different experience of this relationship. And also, I think inner child work is really tremendous and powerful when it comes to healing these woundings. Because our psyche isn't really linear. So for instance, we can get triggered, and certain memories of when we were kids can get activated very much later in life. We can feel like we are 5-year-old. That 5-year-old pain, we can experience that. So I find it really helpful to allow our inner child to express that pain and find ways of meeting those or nourishing those unmet needs. And therapy helps this, meditation and mindfulness practices helps with this. Any kind of creative expression, painting or writing helps with this. That's what I've seen.
For caregivers out there who might be and who will watch this, how can they access this idea without feeling like they're betraying their mother? What I mean by that is, uh, don't argue with your mom. Don't get her stressed because she's of age, or your father. You know, those are constant songs that caregivers hear. Is what you're talking about antithetical to that, or am I misreading it?
No, I think one way that I find it's very helpful is certain things don't have to necessarily be expressed to that person. So
Ah,
these challenging these challenging feelings that we have, we can express it. Like that's why actually play therapy or psychodrama works. It's important to get it out of our system and to give it a language. It's not necessarily important to have that other person hear it. So as long as it could be a letter that that person never reads, or it could be telling the story and the feelings to somebody else. But as long as it gets expressed, as long as we bring it to awareness, these difficult feelings, then I think it's really important, an important way of processing it. And also finding other people who go through similar experiences. Oftentimes when we go through challenges, the sense is that we're alone, that we're the only person who feels this, when in fact that's not true. These are shared experiences. And now with the pandemic, one of the changes is that a lot of groups are online. So regardless of the location, we can find groups for people who are going through similar things, and share stories and share resources and share coping mechanism, and even the experience of not being alone and the experience of being heard is very healing on its own.
now we've got maternity leave and attachment security. What's that all about?
Well, maternity leave is short, but paternity leave is even shorter. So so that actually leaves a lot of mothers by themselves right after they come home from the hospital. And when the first few weeks after the baby is born actually is referred to as the fourth trimester, when the baby is still extremely attached to the mother's body. And a lot of mothers talk about having to go to the bathroom with a baby attached on them, taking a shower with a baby attached to them, sleeping with a baby attached to them. And as sacred as it is, it's not always glorious and definitely not easy. So in our society right now, just as we were talking before, there's not enough resources and not enough support for mothers. The ask is extremely high and almost impossible to achieve. And it really,
Ask you this question: are we becoming hostile to mothers in the society with our policies?
I think there's not enough, and I think the not enough resources. That's for sure, and also the asks is really high. So mothers are not only required to mother in a perfect way with a smile on their face, but they're also required to be attractive and sociable and be successful in their jobs and have manicured hands and cook meals from scratch. And God forbid if their children ever have a tantrum in the grocery store, they're shamed. So we are supposed to have these shiny, well-adjusted children and do everything else that is required of us and work and be a homemaker, which is impossible. So I do think that the ask is just so high, and having conversations like this is so important, because in reality what ends up happening is women just, or mothers just, feel not good enough. And
I never gave my mom a problem in the grocery store. So you have now healing, you call it healing through creativity, and the role of writing and recovering from childhood neglect. And what is, I mean, it's obvious by its title, but it's less obvious because you may say something I didn't expect. What does that mean? Healing through creativity, which, sounds like everybody should be a vlogger or make websites or something, which I highly recommend. But what does that mean? Or both,
Yeah. I think creativity just allows us to access parts of ourselves that we can't really access through even talking, that it allows us to process feelings that are difficult to express otherwise. And writing is just a more accessible tool. And I found such powerful work through writing. For instance, a lot of times I have clients write letters to their childhood versions, or have the childhood versions of them write letters to them. So this allows, again, to the inner child work, healing the inner child and healing the wounds, and allowing for these painful expressions to come out. And once they're in awareness, then we can actually figure out what kind of triggers there are, and find coping mechanisms to actually soothe ourselves. So that's why writing is actually journaling, writing, poetry, whatever form feels right, is just a very powerful tool. But it could be any kind of creative expression, actually. It could be knitting, it could be painting, it could be cooking. Yeah. Whatever it is, it's just the way that processing and being in tune with yourself and your body, that is what matters.
All right. We're getting to like the last 5 minutes just for, time comfort, as I call it. I'll just ask it. Yeah. Tell my viewers about your practice. You're in Oakland. How can they find you online? Your website? What's your website?
I'm in Oakland. I mostly work with trauma survivors. I work with familial trauma, intergenerational trauma, and with individual and couples. I just find it really fascinating to be allowed into the inner world of people. And I'm easy to find. I'm online. My website is duygubalan.com. I'm also on Instagram. And yeah.
Oh, it's yourname.com. That's your website.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm putting that down here so that people can get to it. And since you're an Oaklander, let me ask you, what is your favorite Oakland thing to do?
My favorite, there's so many. I love Oakland. We really love the Lake Merritt area. We find it fun to walk around, and it's beautiful and also feels urban at the same time, which is a great mix. That's, I would say, would rank first.
Yeah, I like to go to the alley when I'm back home. It's at 3325 Grand Avenue, and my great friend Jackie is the owner. Sing. I sang, my first song I sang was 1997. I sang "Fly Me to the Moon."
Oh, really?
Rod Dibble taught me how to sing that. Yeah, nobody in the place, and I said, Rod, I don't know if I'm doing this right. I feel like I'm singing songs that I like, but I'm not singing them well. And he says, well, Zen, you have to always sing to your voice. And that's what I learned that. So I love the alley. I love the Grand Lake Theater. My friend Ali Machon owns that, 3200 Grand Avenue. You've been to Grand Lake?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, you got to look some Oakland love before we close. Doctor, thank you very much for your time. Hey, folks, stick around in the background. We've got at the top of the hour, former Oakland Athletics executive Tosh Tahombe coming by for the first time in what promises to be an epic conversation. Not quite as epic as this one because it has nothing to do with our mothers.
Thank you so much.
Dr.
Pleasure.
Don't move a muscle. Thank you. Folks, that ends this broadcast. Subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube, and please bookmark oaklandnewsnowblog.com, the only one of its kind that uses YouTube videos for its news content. We'll be back.